It is good to be with you again today, and I hope you take your Bibles and open to Deuteronomy chapter 16. Deuteronomy chapter 16. Today is lesson 12 in this series, and we are going to continue on with the laws for the administration of justice. The laws for the administration of justice. Now, last week we dealt with the laws for the appointment of magistrates. Now we come to these laws for the administration of justice by those magistrates, because those magistrates must have laws to keep the law by. Now the magistrates did not make the laws. They keep the laws. They enforce the laws. And as such, their job focused on managing the lives of the people in the Promised Land by following the Lord's laws. Now, who will be the magistrates in the Promised Land? Well, they're going to be the elders, the judges, the priests, the kings, and the prophets, and they will all act together to protect the nation of Israel in their new land. Now, while they have been in the wilderness for 40 years, the people lived under the authority of Moses and Aaron and 70 magistrates, if you remember. 70 people, men, from the elders that Moses selected to help him manage the people for 40 years. And although Aaron and all of those original magistrates, now 40 years later, are dead at this point in the storyline, Moses will soon die also, and more magistrates will be needed to keep the people in line with the Lord when they cross over the Jordan River in just a month or so away after Moses has given this summary of these reports we find here in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, we would think the people, with all that they have seen, would be steadfast in their lives with the Lord, and they would never stray from Him. But that will not be the case. As the people cross over the Jordan River, they will find that in that land, it is going to be filled with all sorts of temptations in defiance to the Lord's will for His people and for His purpose for His people. And they're going to have to fight against that. And the Lord can see ahead as the Lord does. And He knows His people will be tempted and fall into temptation. And therefore the Lord, looking forward and knowing what His people will do and what they will want to do, He gives these specific instructions to address each problem, and He is specific. Now, the administration of the people will be difficult and require constant oversight over those people. Now, the people will seek to worship right off the bat in chapter 16 this thing that is a sensual tree. Chapter 16, verse 21 is where we pick up. You shall not plant for yourself an Asherah of any kind of tree beside the altar of the Lord your God, which you shall make for yourself. Now the Lexham Bible Dictionary says the following about the Asherah. I want you to catch it from somebody else's perspective. It says the name is used for both a Canaanite fertility goddess and the wooden pole that symbolized her. Most occurrences of Asherah in the Bible refer to a sacred pole or tree used in Canaanite and Israelite worship. Asherah poles were located at sacred sites. They are often mentioned in the context of Canaanite worship on every high hill and under every luxuriant tree. An Asherah pole is sometimes explicitly related to an altar of Baal, a Canaanite fertility deity. They are mentioned alongside altars, sacred pillars, and idols. And I've given the scriptures there that you can see there. They're also those scriptures are in the notes that you can pick up. Now, the Asherah poles looked much like the totem poles seen in American Indian areas that we have here in our country. But the carving on these poles were not like the American Indian carvings. The carving on these Asherah poles was detestable. People seeking the fertility goddess's blessing, they carved the poles to look like, I'm just going to say it like this, the parts of a man that are used in the reproduction process to attract the female goddess attention. Now, the poles were perverse. And they showed the Lord that the people did not trust Him solely for their blessings and provisions, because they're reaching out to a foreign fertility goddess instead of allowing God just to provide for them as He's promised that He will. Now, the first thing we come to with this is the justice with the sacred pillar. Now, the magistrates would need to oversee justice when the people built a sacred pillar, of which sometimes these Asherah poles would be put right beside them. He says in verse 22, "You shall not set up for yourself a sacred pillar which the Lord your God hates." Now, the Lord hates these sacred pillars. They are the same as stone obelisks or monuments built to honor or give praise to some being. And the problem with sacred stones comes with the word sacred, which means holy. The Lord is holy, and He is the only holy God. No other God exists. No fake God is holy. And the Lord hates the worship of counterfeit gods. My soul, He started off the first 10 commandments with that type of language. So moving from that, we come to justice with stained offerings. Then comes this problem with these stained offerings. Chapter 17, verse 1 says this, "You shall not sacrifice to the Lord your God an ox or a sheep which has a blemish or any defect, for that is a detestable thing to the Lord your God." A stained offering by way of a blemish, a defect, a disease. Those offerings were absolutely forbidden from being offered to the Lord in a required offering directed by the Lord, as we saw back in Leviticus chapters 1 through 7. The Lord will only accept a perfect offering in His eyes. So that brings us to the place where now these magistrates not only have to administer that there cannot be any Asherah poles, and he has to administer that the altar that there can be no building of altars and monuments to other gods, and he has to administer that there can be no stained sacrifices brought to the Lord God. He also has to administer justice with a sacrilege person. Verse 2. "If there is found in your midst, in any of your towns, which the Lord your God is giving you, a man or a woman who does what is evil in the sight of the Lord your God by transgressing His covenant, and has gone and has served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun, or the moon, or any of the heavenly host, which I have not commanded, and if it is told you and you have heard of it, then you shall inquire thoroughly." So the Lord's giving these magistrates marching orders about people. When an idolater commits a sacrilege, he does it when he breaks the Lord's laws and worships fake gods and heavenly objects. Sacrilege is a crime of stealing what is consecrated to God. Now the nation of Israel must worship the Lord and keep His laws, which belong to Him. And when a person abandons the Lord's laws, and he goes and he worships some other gods, that is an evil theft that he has committed against the Lord. So what are the magistrates to do when they're going to search out and to investigate? Well, once they've investigated, the magistrates must condemn the idolater at the gate of the cities and the villages where they hold court. Verse 4b. Behold, if it is true, and the thing certain that this detestable thing has been done in Israel, then you shall bring out that man or that woman who has done this evil deed to your gates, that is, a man or a woman, and you shall stone them to death. It's the death penalty. The penalty for transgressing the Lord as an idol worshiper is stoning. Well, once you've condemned the idolater, you must confirm the idolater. Now, the problem for the magistrates comes forth at this point. How does a magistrate know the idolater is guilty? Verse 6. On the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses, he who is to die shall be put to death. He shall not be put to death on the evidence of 1 witness. So the magistrate's verdict had to be confirmed by at least 2 eyewitnesses, but never only 1 witness. So if he has 2 eyewitnesses, we now come to the casualty of the idolater. With the testimony of those 2 witnesses, he's going to be stoned. But who will cast the first stone? Verse 7. The hand of the witness shall be first against him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. So the witnesses must know the seriousness of their testimony. And if the person is convicted and sentenced to death because of their testimony, they will be charged with casting the first stones to kill that person. Well, from there we move to the justice of a serious case. What do you do with a serious case when it comes to, you would think, okay, idolatry is serious, but it is. But not all cases are easy to render justice with. There comes cases that these magistrates may never have heard about or thought about, and they don't know how to handle the cases. So the Lord knows this, and He makes provisions for such cases in the magistrate courts. The first step is to review. There it is. The first thing is to review each case. Each case's elements must be taken very seriously. Those elements, and he must listen to those parties and the disputes. Verse 8. If any case is too difficult for you to decide between one kind of, get this, homicide or another, between one kind of lawsuit or another, and between one kind of assault or another, being cases of dispute in your courts, then you shall arise and go up to the place which the Lord your God chooses. So when it comes to homicides, we're not talking about idolatry anymore. We're talking about homicides or lawsuits between parties or assaults on each other between parties. Each dispute's factual details can absolutely be endless because everybody has their story and no 2 cases are the same. Therefore, the Lord allows magistrates to take the cases to a higher power. In fact, He doesn't just allow it, He requires that they take them. And so in other words, first of all, their job was to review, and now their job is to refer. So the magistrates controlled the courts at the gates of each town, and inside the towns, Levitical priests and judges held their officials' positions to deal with the more complicated issues. So when the magistrate could not decide or had never handled a case like has come before him, he was to review first, refer second, to the priest or to the judges. Verse 9. So you shall come to the Levitical priest or the judge who is in office in those days, and you shall inquire of them, and they will declare to you the verdict in the case. Now we do not know how these priests and these judges came to their determination about these cases. I think we can assume that the magistrates would come and present all the facts, but we don't know what has happened in the past, and we don't know that that actually happened. So we don't know. Yet, it was the duty of the priest or the judges above the magistrates to render the verdict. So first we have a review, and then they have to refer, and now comes respect. Once rendering the verdict given by the priest or the judges, and that occurs, the magistrates must respect that decision. Verse 10. You shall do according to the terms of the verdict which they declare to you from the place which the Lord chooses, and you shall be careful to observe according to all that they teach you. New magistrates can never know by instinct how to render a proper decision on all the difficult kinds of cases brought before them. It's just impossible. But the priest and the judges must have had more experience with all the issues. So they were to teach the magistrates how to render proper decisions. So these priests and these magistrates became the instructors. These priests and the judges became the instructors of the magistrates to teach them, to get them up to speed. So the magistrates were to respect the teaching they received and learn from it so they could handle the next case that came similar to what they were handling. The next time they could handle it themselves. So it's review and then refer and then respect, and then we come to the word remove. The magistrates must be careful to follow the instructions of the priests and judges completely. If they do not, they could be removed and face the death penalty for ruling incorrectly. So these magistrates had pressure on them from up above. Verse 11. According to the terms of the law which they teach you, and according to the verdict which they tell you, you shall do. You shall not turn aside from the word which they declare to you, to the right or to the left. And the man who acts presumptuously by not listening to the priest who stands there to serve the Lord your God, nor to the judge, that man shall die. Thus you shall purge the evil from Israel. So the Lord requires the men who are magistrates to render justly and to follow the instruction of the priest and the judges. But the people who take cases to the magistrates must be willing to accept the verdict. And if they do not accept the judgment, they are acting presumptuously. Now, what does that mean? It means to take a case to the magistrates at the gate impulsively or rebelliously without reasonable cause. Now, without good reason means the person brings the case with an evil intent, and evil must be purged, and the evil man must die. Well, So if that happens and that person is removed, what's the result? Why would the Lord bring such a rigorous instruction in this? This is rigorous. This is stringent. It's because of the result among the people. Verse 13. Then all the people will hear and be afraid, and will not act presumptuously again. Accusations of homicide, filing of lawsuits, and assaults are severe and should never be brought lightly to the courts. And the penalty for those among the nation who do such, bring frivolous lawsuits, should face the most severe punishments, and the punishment is their lives. If you bring a case of homicide or a lawsuit against somebody and you know that you're bringing a fake case or an assault case, if you do that, you're putting your life on the line if the judges figure it out. Well, now, that is dealing with the justice of the magistrates and the justice, the administration of the justice when it deals to those type of things that come. But now we come to a different type of administration of justice that these magistrates have to do. They have to administer the justice with a selected, or with the selected ruler. The justice with the selected ruler. When the people come to a place where they want a king, the want of a king. Now the Lord is looking far into the future. Well, at least in our day and time, it looks like it's far. The Lord comes to this topic of the justice with the selection of a ruler by addressing the time when Israel will want a king way in the future. Verse 14. When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, and you possess it and live in it, and you say, I will set a king over me like all the nations who are around me, you shall surely set a king over you whom the Lord your God chooses. One from among your countrymen you shall set as king over yourselves. You may not put a foreigner over yourselves who is not your countryman. Folks, it is going to be 436 years before the nation of Israel jumps up and says to Samuel, we need a king. 1 Samuel chapter 8. And the Lord knew this would occur 436 years before. So He set this in place so they would have it. So they would be prepared for this request. And the Lord will select a man from the tribe of Benjamin. And you know that. His name will be Saul. We call him King Saul. The Lord will be ready for him and he will be in place. But when they want a king, you have to remember, then there's the way of the king. From the want of a king, the Lord directs to the way of the king. And the first instruction concerns the king's horses. Verse 16. Moreover, he shall not multiply horses for himself, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses, since the Lord has said to you, you shall never again return that way. Why is the Lord concerned with the future king of Israel multiplying horses for himself? Now, no commentator to date that I have found can justify the reason the Lord forbids the king from multiplying the horses. We just don't have enough information anywhere in the Scriptures to give us an educated word of explanation with this instruction, or on this instruction, I should say. However, we do understand the second phrase, where he said, nor shall he cause the people to return to Egypt to multiply horses. The Lord led Israel out of Egypt. Then He kept Israel in the wilderness for 40 years until almost every Israelite who lived in Egypt had died to curb the desire for the Israelites to want to return to Egypt. The Lord broke all relationships between Egypt and Israel, and He wanted it to stay that way. And the Lord promised to provide Israel with all it ever needed, and there would never be a reason to trade in commerce with Egypt again. The Lord means it when He says, "You shall never again return that way." Now, when Solomon becomes the king of Israel, Solomon will break both of these instructions. We find that in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles records Solomon's transgressions. Solomon's horses were imported from Egypt and from Kue. The king's traders procured them from Kue for a price. 2 Chronicles 1:16. Now Solomon had 4,000 stalls of horses and chariots, and 12,000 horsemen. And he stationed them in the chariot cities, and with the king in Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 9:25. Solomon did wrong because he went back to Egypt to get horses, and from another place called Kue. He wasn't supposed to multiply his horses by going and gaining them from these other places. Well, then we come to another problem. After the Lord talks about the way of the king, the Lord gives an instruction concerning get this, the wives of the king. Verse 17. He shall not multiply wives for himself, or else his heart will turn away. Nor shall he greatly increase silver and gold for himself. Now Saul, the first king of Israel, had one wife, and he had a concubine. And Saul developed mental problems during his reign as king, but his wives were not the cause for that. So King Saul pretty well did okay with this because he only had a wife and a concubine. And of course the concubine was for having more children at the time. Now when King David came along as the second king, he had 8 wives and he had 10 concubines. He's stretching it just a little bit, if you might think. That's more than just one wife. However, David's wives did not turn his heart from the Lord. Nevertheless, he broke this law. Now, if you remember also, down in those sons of David, there was the third king of Israel, Solomon, third king of Israel. Now, he had kind of a thing for wives and women. When it was all said and done, by the end of his life, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and that's 1,000 women. And when we know how long that he reigned, and you divide that by how long he reigned, he was married a new woman about every 14 days. I think he kind of broke the law of the Lord, given here on the plains of Moab. Solomon's wives did turn his heart from the Lord. And much of Solomon's great sin during his reign was a secondary result of the marriages to all these foreign women. In fact, the Lord addresses this in 1 Kings. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter. Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonites, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He loved them all. He had 700 wives of a royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods. and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of David, his father, had been. So Solomon also broke this second part of this law because he significantly increased also his silver and his gold for himself beside his wives. With all those women, I guess he had to have quite a bit of money to satisfy their needs. And so Solomon's yearly income was 666 talents of gold. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 14 tells us this. Now the weight of gold which came in to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold, besides that from the traders and the wares of the merchants and all the kings of the Arabs and the governors of the country. Now, based on archaeological findings, most commentators and commentaries say that 3,000 shekels equaled 1 talent of gold. 3,000 shekels, 1 talent of gold. Solomon got 666 talents. And that would be equal to, get this is how many shekels it would be equal to. Every year, Solomon received 1,998,000 shekels. Okay. A gold shekel weighs 4/10 of an ounce. Well, in 2021, the year that we are doing this study, the price of gold for 4/10 of an ounce is worth $680. Therefore, Solomon's salary in today's gold prices would have been, get ready for this, $1,358,640,000 per year. Well, I think he had enough money to take care of all those wives, don't you? And no doubt Solomon broke the Lord's law. He broke it. He did not hold to it. And it would not be until the end of his life that he would regret it. Now we come to the words of the king. When a new king was asked for, the Lord had a requirement for every new king. I'm not sure that every new king did this, because if they had followed this, there wouldn't have been such mess that was going on. They had to make a record of the law. So from the wives of the king, we come to the words of the king, and looking forward, the Lord said this, I require that every new coming king must know his laws, the Lord's laws. And how would they know that? They are to record the law themselves. Verse 18. Now it shall come about when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself a copy of this law on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priest. So each new king of Israel was to make a personal copy of the book of Deuteronomy with the priest watching over him. He was to write the law. Now he's to read the law. Once the new king has the copy of the law written, he reads his copy regularly all of his life. Verse 19. It shall be with him, and he shall read it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by carefully observing all the words of this law and these statutes. So he writes the law, he's to read the law, and he's also to respect the law. Each new king is required to respect the law. Verse 20. That his heart may not be lifted up above his countrymen, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, so that he and his sons may continue long in his kingdom in the midst of Israel. Well, King Saul did not respect the Deuteronomic law. He and his sons would not survive long amid Israel. In fact, most of them would die on the day that King Saul died. David did respect the Deuteronomic law. He and his sons did survive. In fact, they survived past the days of Jesus, the birth of Jesus. Solomon did not respect the Deuteronomic law. He had only one child, a son, a reprobate son, a terrible, foolish son. And that son only lived past Solomon's days by 17 years. He should have lived 40 years. But no, he didn't. Just 17 years. However, Solomon repented in the last years of his life, as recorded in his book of regrets. I said that a few minutes ago, in that book called Ecclesiastes. The book of regrets. It is a sad book. It is a sad book. But it's a joyous book at the end, because Solomon finally got his life back together right at the end of the book. But the whole first part of the book tells you how man thinks without God. A man without God, what he searches for, what he's longing for. The first part of the book is ungodly. And finally, in that last chapter and a half, it becomes godly when Solomon gets his act right. It was his testimony of his wasted life. The Lord allowed Solomon's son to sit on Israel's throne for another 363 years. Well, now we come and we move on from the administration of the laws of justice. We move on to the administration of the priest. For the magistrates are to look after them too. And what are they to look after? Well, they're to look after the priestly position. The priestly position. Continuing with these laws of administration of justice, we come to this administration of the priest. We begin with the priestly position. Chapter 18 and verse 1. The Levitical priest, the whole tribe of Levi, shall have no portion or inheritance with Israel. They shall eat the Lord's offerings by fire and his portions. They shall have no inheritance among the countrymen. The Lord is their inheritance, as he promised them. So the tribe of Levi will not be given a specific territory in the promised land to have it its own. None of the sons of Levi are going to have a plot of land that they can say, this is my land, this is my house. It belongs to my family unit. The families of Levi will live among all the other tribes as their priests. The required offerings will provide their families with their food needs and with other things. The Lord provides for them. That's their position. But then we have the priestly provisions. Specifically, the Lord details those priestly provisions that will belong to the Levites, verse 3. Now this shall be the priest's due from the people, from those who offer a sacrifice, either an ox or sheep, or which they shall give to the priest the shoulder and the 2 cheeks and the stomach. And you shall give him the first fruits of your grain, of your wine and your oil, and the first shearing of your sheep. For the Lord your God has chosen him and his sons from all your tribes to stand and serve in the name of the Lord forever. Where are these Levites today? Forever, forever. Where are they today? We cannot identify them anywhere. But the Lord makes a promise here in this verse. They are to stand and serve in the name of the Lord forever. And forever they stand before the Lord, even though no Levite can be identified today with certainty. But the Lord knows the bloodline, and he will bring them back into public view in the last days. But once the nation crosses the Jordan River in the month after giving this message in Deuteronomy, the Levites, they know who they are, and they will stand and they will serve the Lord until the destruction of the temple by Rome in 70 AD, 1,494 years later. Well, now we come to the priestly portion. From the priestly position to the priestly provisions, we come to the priestly portion, verse 6. Now if a Levite comes from any of your towns throughout Israel where he resides, and comes whenever he desires to the place which the Lord chooses, then he shall serve in the name of the Lord his God, like all his fellow Levites who stand there before the Lord. They shall eat equal portions, except what they receive from the sale of their father's estates. Well, we got some explaining to do on that. Throughout the Promised Land, in each tribal area, the Lord will set aside areas for the offerings to be brought to Him in addition to the place where that tabernacle is going to be located. And throughout the tribal areas, the Levites are to be treated fairly. And each Levite will receive an equal portion of what all Levites receive throughout the nations. Share and share alike. However, down in verse 8 that we read, we notice this. They shall eat equal portions, except what they receive from the sale of their father's estates. What does that mean? The Levites could not own land in a tribal area. But according to Leviticus chapter 25:33 that we found in our study of Leviticus, a Levite could own a house and its contents on borrowed land until the year of Jubilee. Leviticus 25:33 says this, "What therefore belongs to the Levites may be redeemed, and a house sale in the city of this possessions reverts in the Jubilee. For the house of the cities of the Levites are their possessions among the sons of Israel." So they can own houses, but they can't own the land. And they really don't own the houses either. In fact, in the year of Jubilee, the Levites had to return the houses that they owned in that tribal area to the families of each tribe who donated the property for them to live upon. And the Levites did not receive a share and share alike portion of the house sales in the return. Any trading or selling of houses within a tribe or between the different tribes could happen. And when it happened, they had to understand this. They had to understand that no matter where they were in this 50-year timeline, every 50 years, no matter what the house was sold for, it was returned to the original family, granted the original land in the first 7 years after the nation crossed the Jordan River to take the Promised Land. And that house and that property may have passed through many different families' hands, but on that 50th year, that land had to go back to the original family unit. The transaction happened on that year of Jubilee, and it was not a tithable occurrence. And it did not require an offering, by the way. And therefore, the Levites did not receive a share of that trade. Now we come to the priestly prohibition. Verse 9. "When you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, or who uses divination, or who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so." Within the list found in this passage, the Lord makes us aware of all the pretenders of knowledge. Did you hear that list of the pretenders of knowledge? the diviners, the interpreters, the sorcerers, the spiritists, those who call up the dead. They are detestable to the Lord. And more than that, the Canaanites, according to this passage, sought them out for their make-believe knowledge. The proof of their attempts to exert their fake knowledge will be known because their prophecies will not come to pass. And the priests were never to imitate the practices of these witches and these diviners in the new land. Well, now, first we have the administration of the people, then we have the administration of the priests, and now we come to the administration of the prophets. And in reality, this announcement is the establishment of the prophets in every generation. Verse 15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your countrymen, and you shall listen to him. This is according to all that you asked of the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God. Let me not see this great fire anymore, or I will die. The Lord said to me, they have spoken well. I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. Abraham and Joseph were prophets in the stories found back in the book of Genesis. Moses was a prophet. Here in Deuteronomy chapter 34:10, it's going to tell us that. During the Genesis story, many false prophets of false gods flourished in every place in the world. And these prophets were in part responsible for all those ancient mythological gods that are out there that we hear about today, the Hermes, the Zeus. That was all because of these old false prophets. And speaking through Moses here, the Lord announces for the first time that the Lord will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your countrymen, and you shall listen to him. The Lord will raise prophets among the nation of Israel in every generation, all the way down to John, the writer of the book of Revelation, and he will be the last. No other prophets have lived since the time of John's death. None that can tell the future. However, in between the crossing over the Jordan River to take the promised land, until the death of John, many prophets of the Lord will live, and they will direct Israel. And during that extended time, many false prophets will try to speak for God, but they're fake gods. So we come to the first topic here of the ensuing of the prophets. With the establishment of the prophets, we hear about the ensuing of the prophets, verse 19. It shall come about that whoever will not listen to my words, which he shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. With the Lord raising up prophets among the people, consequences will come upon those who do not listen to the words that they speak. When the Lord says, I myself will require it of him, he is saying he expects anyone to listen and everyone to listen to his true prophets. But what happens if they're not a true prophet? Not everyone who announces himself as a prophet of the Lord is the Lord's prophet. And for that there is a death penalty. Moses here speaks of the execution of the prophets in verse 19. But the prophet who speaks a word presumptuously in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or which he speaks in the name of other gods, that prophet shall die. We've crossed this word presumptuously in the last chapter, chapter 17, verses 11 and 12. And there we defined it in context as doing something impulsively or rebelliously with evil intent. And the definition applies here in this passage as well. The Lord never speaks through His prophet with evil intent. The real problem in this passage stems from a prophet of the Lord or a pretend prophet of the Lord, either of them who say something in the name of the Lord that the Lord has not spoken to them. And the penalty for saying, "Thus saith the Lord," when the Lord did not thus say, is death. Also, the death penalty is the cost of being a prophet of a false god. Well, how do we know if they're false? Well, how can the people of Israel know a true prophet? By the examination of the prophet. Verse 15. You may say in your heart, "How will we know the word which the Lord has not spoken?" But when a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not come about or come true, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken, the prophet has spoken presumptuously, you shall not be afraid of him. When the prophet says, "Thus saith the Lord," and you're going to have this problem, and it doesn't come true, don't be afraid of that prophet. When a prophet of the Lord speaks, his words will come true. And when a prophet speaks and his words are not fulfilled, he is a false prophet. As Moses says, no one should fear a false prophet. The Lord will take care of all false prophets in His time. Now, in the following chapter, we are going to look at the administration of the protectors, the battles, the slain, the families, the property, and Israel's morality. But for now, our time is up, and we will have to cover those topics when we meet again in our next lesson. May the Lord bless the teaching of this word. Amen and amen.